Dr. Rachel Armstrong's gloved hands paused mid-surgery, her breath catching behind the surgical mask. For 15 years, she'd opened countless tumors. But this was different. The mass lay in the specimen pan, 18 centimeters of what should have been routine. When her scalpel pierced the thick capsule, blonde hair spilled out, not a strand or two, 8 inches of fine, golden hair that caught the operating room lights. "Have you ever seen this much?" she whispered to the scrub nurse. The nurse shook her head, eyes wide above her mask. Armstrong continued the incision. Fully formed teeth, 12 of them, gleamed white against the sebaceous tissue. Bone fragments, and something that looked disturbingly like primitive brain matter on the table. Margaret Wilson, 63, retired nurse, mother of 2, breathed steadily under anesthesia, unaware that her body had been carrying a secret for over 6 decades, a secret that would change everything her family thought they knew. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Margaret Wilson had spent 35 years as an ICU nurse at Cincinnati General Hospital. She knew the weight of a chart before opening it, could read a monitor's rhythm from across the room, and understood that the body always told the truth, even when patients lied. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd become her own worst patient. At 63, Maggie lived alone in a tidy brick house in Oakley, a quiet Cincinnati neighborhood where maple trees lined the streets and neighbors still waved from their porches. The house felt too large since Frank died 5 years ago, sudden stroke, gone before the ambulance arrived, but she couldn't bring herself to leave the place where they'd raised their children. Every morning, she poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one out of habit. The second cup always went cold on Frank's side of the table while she listened to the old radio station playing songs from the 60s. Sam Cooke, the Righteous Brothers, music from when they were young and believed they'd have forever. Her children worried. She knew. Sarah called every Sunday like clockwork, her voice carrying that professional nurse's tone, calm but assessing. David flew in from Seattle twice a year, his visits brief and somehow formal, as though he were checking items off a list. Maggie told herself it was enough. They had their own lives. She kept Frank's blue work shirts in the closet, still smelling faintly of his old sweetest cologne, on particularly lonely nights. She'd slip one on over her nightgown and pretend his arms were still around her. Pathetic, maybe, but after 46 years of marriage, she'd earned the right to her rituals. The volunteer work at church kept her busy. Tuesdays at the food bank, Thursdays visiting shut-ins who were often younger than she was but had given up on life. She prided herself on not being one of those elderly women who let themselves go, who surrendered to age and isolation, which made ignoring the growing mass in her abdomen all the more ridiculous. She was a nurse. For God's sake, she knew better. But knowing and doing were different things entirely, especially when doing meant facing the possibility of cancer, surgery, maybe dying alone in a hospital bed while machines beeped the countdown to nothing. So she'd pulled her sweaters looser, bought pants with elastic waists, and told herself it was just middle-age spread, just bloating, just nothing, until her daughter noticed what she'd been hiding. 6 months earlier, Maggie had noticed it while getting dressed for Sunday service. Her favorite navy dress, the one Frank always said made her eyes look like sapphires, wouldn't zip past her waist. She tugged at the fabric, sucked in her stomach, but the zipper refused to budge. Standing before the bathroom mirror, she'd pressed her palms against her abdomen, firm, rounded, not soft like fat, but hard, like something solid beneath the skin. "Getting old," she'd muttered, turning sideways to assess the damage. "Too much comfort food." It was true she'd been eating more since Frank's death anniversary in August. Cornbread, pot roast, all his favorites, as though cooking them could bring him back for one more meal. The weight gain made sense, except it wasn't weight gain, not really, and somewhere in the medical knowledge she'd accumulated over 3.5 decades, she knew it. That night, she'd done what millions of Americans do when fear meets denial. She Googled her symptoms. Abdominal swelling, women over sti. The search results offered comfort in neat, clinical paragraphs. Ovarian cysts, very common, 90% benign, usually resolve on their own. She'd clicked through medical websites, avoiding the cancer links, focusing on the reassuring statistics. By midnight, she'd convinced herself it was nothing, a harmless cyst. Her body doing strange menopausal things, she'd monitor it. If it got worse, then she'd see a doctor. The months passed. The mass grew, and Maggie became an expert at strategic dressing. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in early March, just as Maggie was settling in with her second cup of tea, the one she'd poured for Frank and would end up drinking herself. As always, "Mom, when was your last checkup?" Sarah's voice carried that deceptively casual tone that Maggie recognized from her own nursing days. The tone that meant you already knew the answer and didn't like it. "Oh, I'm fine. Honey, been so busy with the food bank and, Mom, when?" Maggie stared at Frank's photo on the mantel. He would have made her go, would have driven her himself, and sat in that waiting room with his crossword puzzle and terrible coffee. Maybe 2 years. The time blurs. You know. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats too long. "I'm coming over the Saturday. With the kids." Before Maggie could protest, Sarah had hung up. Saturday arrived with Emma and Lucas in tow, their 8- and 6-year-old energy filling the too-quiet house with blessed noise. They were playing in the backyard when it happened. Maggie bent to pick up Lucas's fallen toy truck, and a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, one hand flying to her side. "Grandma, why is your tummy so big?" Emma's voice carried that innocent brutality only children possess. "Are you having a baby?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, and Maggie watched her daughter's trained eye take in everything, the wince of pain, the protective hand over the abdomen, the way Maggie's loose cardigan couldn't quite hide the distension anymore. "Kids, go get your jackets from the car," Sarah said quietly. When they'd thundered out the front door, she turned to her mother. "Let me see. Sarah, I don't need let me see." Maggie lifted her sweater. Even she could see it was worse. The swelling had increased. The skin stretched taut. Sarah's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something Maggie hadn't seen in her daughter's eyes since Frank died raw fear. "We're making an appointment. Tomorrow. Sarah, I already lost Dad." Sarah's voice cracked. I won't lose you too because you're too stubborn to see a doctor." They stared at each other across the living room, years of distance and unspoken hurts hanging between them like cobwebs. Finally, Maggie nodded. Sarah pulled out her phone immediately, calling Dr. Chen's office before her mother could change her mind. "March 12th, she said. confirming the appointment. I'm taking her myself." That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. At 3 in the morning, she wandered through the house, touching things: Frank's reading chair, the photo albums, the grandmother's mirror that had belonged to her mother and her mother before that. In the hallway, Sarah's old music box started playing "You Are My Sunshine." The tinny melody filled the darkness. Maggie stood frozen. That music box hadn't worked in years. She'd tried to wind it dozens of times, but the mechanism was broken. Yet there it was, playing. She took it as a sign. From Frank, from God, from whatever waited beyond the veil. Tomorrow she would face it, whatever it turned out to be. The waiting room at Dr. Patricia Chen's office smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. Sarah sat beside Maggie, her knee bouncing in that nervous rhythm nurses develop controlled anxiety disguised as restlessness. Maggie clutched the medical history form, pen hovering over a question that seemed to pulse on the page. Family history of ovarian cancer. Her hand moved almost without her permission, checking the box marked yes. Sarah leaned over. "What, Mom? You never told me." "My mother." Maggie's voice came out flat. "She died when she was 67. Ovarian cancer. I didn't see the point in worrying you kids." Sarah's face went pale. "That's exactly the kind of thing we need to know." Before Maggie could respond, a nurse called her name. Chen had been Maggie's primary care physician for a decade, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd worked her way through medical school as a single mother. She greeted Maggie with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The physical examination took less than 5 minutes. Chen's hands palpated Maggie's abdomen with practiced efficiency, her expression growing increasingly serious. "How long has it been this size?" "I'm not sure. Maybe 6 months, Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the tale of a doctor who'd just found something concerning but didn't want to alarm the patient yet. "I'm ordering an immediate ultrasound. We'll do it today, downstairs." "Is that really necessary? I mean, it's probably just Mrs. Wilson." Chen's tone left no room for negotiation. "With your family history and the size of this mass, we're not waiting. Sarah, you can go with her." The ultrasound room was dim and cold. The technician, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, squeezed gel onto Maggie's exposed abdomen and pressed the wand against her skin. The monitor showed grainy black and white images that meant nothing to Maggie, but clearly meant something to the technician, whose smile faded as she moved the wand across Maggie's belly. "I need to get the radiologist," she said, her professional mask firmly in place. "Just wait here for a moment." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Sarah held Maggie's hand, neither of them speaking, both understanding that silence in medical settings was never a good sign. Dr. James Bradford, the radiologist, entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd delivered bad news before. He reviewed the images, his finger tracing the outline of something large and irregular on the screen. 8 centimeters, he said finally. Mixed echogenicity, which means different tissue densities. This isn't a typical presentation for a simple cyst. He turned to face them. "I'm ordering a CT scan with contrast. First available appointment is tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. "What do you think it is?" Maggie heard herself ask. "I don't speculate until I have better imaging, but given your family history, we need detailed visualization. The CT will show us exactly what we're dealing with." That evening, Sarah refused to leave. She made dinner the Frank's pot roast, though neither of them had much appetite, and they sat at the kitchen table pushing food around their plates. "I should call David," Maggie said. "I already did, while you were getting dressed." Maggie looked up sharply. "Sarah, he's family, Mom. He has a right to know." Yet Sarah's voice carried an edge Maggie hadn't heard in years. "He's booking a flight for the day after tomorrow, after we get the CT results." At 11 o'clock that night, the Seattle time, David called. His voice carried across the country with that careful neutrality he'd perfected over the years. "Mom, Sarah told me. I'm coming home. David, honey, you don't need to." "I'm coming home," he repeated. And something in his tone reminded Maggie of Frank, that quiet stubbornness that meant the decision was final. After they hung up, Maggie couldn't sleep. At 3 in the morning, she found herself in the kitchen wearing Frank's blue shirt, making 2 cups of tea out of habit. She sat at the table with the photo album, the one with pictures from before the kids were born. There she was at 2 years old, a chubby toddler with brown curls, sitting in what looked like an empty room. Her mother's handwriting on the back read, "Maggie, age 2, always talking to someone we couldn't see." Maggie stared at that photograph for a long time, a strange chill running through her. She'd forgotten about that, her imaginary friend. What had she called her? Something with an L. Lily, Lucy. The memory was there, but out of reach, like something glimpsed through fog. The CT scan the next morning was both better and worse than the ultrasound. Better because she could lie still and close her eyes. Worse because of the contrast dye burning through her veins and the machine's claustrophobic tunnel. The technician said the results would take 4 to 6 hours to process. At 2:47 that afternoon, Maggie would remember the exact time forever. Dr. Chen called Sarah's cell phone. "I need you both to come in today, as soon as possible." "Can't you just tell us over the phone?" Sarah's knuckles were white around the phone. "Not this. I need you here. Can you come at 5? Those 2.5 hours were the longest of Maggie's life. At 5 o'clock sharp, they sat in Dr. Chen's office while she pulled up images on her computer screen. The mass glowed white against the gray of Maggie's organs. Impossible to ignore. There was a measuring error on the initial ultrasound. Dr. Chen said carefully, "This isn't 8 centimeters." She zoomed in on the image. "It's 18 centimeters, and it's not a simple cyst. The composition is complex, very complex." She turned to face them. "There are calcifications, fatty tissue, and what appears to be bone fragments." The words didn't make sense. Bone fragments inside her abdomen. "I'm referring you to Dr. Rachel Armstrong at Cincinnati Medical Center. She's a gynecologic oncology surgeon." Dr. Chen's expression was kind but grave. "You have an appointment with her tomorrow morning at 9. The word oncology hit Maggie like a physical blow. Cancer. They thought she had cancer. That night, while Maggie tried and failed to sleep, Sarah sat at her own kitchen table with her laptop, falling down the rabbit hole that every frightened family member descends medical research on the internet. Ovarian cancer, hereditary risk, BRCA gene mutation, calcified ovarian tumor prognosis. Each search led to darker territory, statistics that made her stomach clench, survival rates that dropped with each stage. The phrase 5-year survival appeared so often, it began to lose meaning. At 2 in the morning, something made her get up and drive to her mother's house. She still had a key. She let herself in quietly and went to the filing cabinet where Maggie kept important papers. The medical records were in a manila folder labeled simply Mother. Sarah's grandmother, Margaret Eleanor Morrison, had died when Sarah was 7. Sarah remembered a thin woman in a hospital bed, but little else. Her mother never talked about it. The records told the story Maggie had hidden. Stage 4, ovarian cancer. Diagnosed too late. 6 months from diagnosis to death. And there, in the genetic counselor's notes from 1996, recommend daughter be tested for BRCA mutation, strong hereditary component. Maggie had never been tested, and Sarah's hands shook as she photographed the pages with her phone. Her mother might be dying from something that could have been caught years ago, if only she'd known to look. Dr. Rachel Armstrong's office occupied the 5th floor of Cincinnati Medical Center's new oncology wing. The waiting room had that carefully designed cheerfulness that fooled no one. Soft colors, fake plants, magazines. Nobody could concentrate enough to read. Armstrong herself was younger than Maggie expected, mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had the direct gaze of someone who'd learned not to waste time on false comfort. "Tell me about your family history," she said, after reviewing the CT images. Maggie hesitated. Sarah pulled out her phone. Her mother died of ovarian cancer at 67, stage 4. The genetic counselor recommended BRCA testing, but Mom was never informed. Armstrong's expression didn't change, but she made a note. "How long have you had symptoms, Mrs. Wilson?" "Maybe 6 months, maybe longer. I didn't want to know. I understand, but we're here now, and we're going to figure this out." Armstrong pulled up the CT images on her computer. "The size alone is concerning 18 centimeters. But what's unusual is the composition. See these bright areas? That's calcium. And this darker region, fatty tissue. This isn't typical of ovarian carcinoma." She zoomed in on another section. "And this area here that appears to be bone?" Maggie's medical training kicked in despite her fear. "Bone. How is that possible?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm ordering an MRI for better soft tissue visualization. And we need tumor markers, CA and even others. But I also want a biopsy." Armstrong turned to face them directly. "The family history concerns me. The size concerns me, but the composition is unusual. I've seen a lot of ovarian tumors. This doesn't fit the pattern." "What does that mean?" Sarah's voice was tight. "It means we need more information before jumping to conclusions. MRI is scheduled for tomorrow morning, biopsy the day after." David's flight landed at 6 that evening. Sarah picked him up, and they drove to their mother's house through rush-hour traffic that felt like moving through molasses. "How bad is it?" David asked. "Bad enough that she has an oncology surgeon. Bad enough that there's bone growing inside her." David absorbed this in silence. He'd always been the quiet one, the analytical one, even as a child. He'd processed emotions internally while Sarah wore hers on her sleeve at the house. Maggie opened the door, already crying. David wrapped his arms around her, and she felt so small, So fragile. You didn't have to come all this way. Yes, he said simply. I did. The MRI took 90 minutes. Maggie lay perfectly still in the machine's tunnel, the rhythmic thumping like a mechanical heartbeat. She spent the time counting Frank's favorite things, a meditation technique she'd developed after his death, his blue work shirts, his terrible puns, the way he'd hum while doing dishes, his hands' broad palms, long fingers, always warm, the way he'd kiss her forehead every morning before work, 46 years of small moments that added up to a life. Somewhere in the counting, surrounded by the machine's noise, Maggie realized something: she wasn't ready to die. She still had things to say, to do, to be. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the pull of the future instead of the weight of the past. The next day, March 16th, waiting for her biopsy appointment, Sarah sat in the surgical center's waiting room flipping through magazines. Most were months old, curled at the edges from anxious hands. At the bottom of the stack, she found a medical journal from 2008. Normally, she wouldn't have bothered, but something made her open it. An article about rare ovarian tumors caught her eye. Mature cystic teratomas presentation and management. The accompanying photos made her stomach turn. Tumors filled with hair-long, thick hair, fully formed teeth, bone fragments, even primitive brain tissue. The article explained these were germ cell tumors, capable of developing tissue from all 3 embryonic layers. Sarah read the entire article, then closed the journal with shaking hands. Too rare. She told herself, Mom's tumor couldn't be this. These cases were 1 in 10,000, mostly in younger women. She didn't mention it to her mother. The biopsy was performed under ultrasound guidance. Dr. Armstrong's hands steady as she inserted the needle through Maggie's abdominal wall into the mass. Maggie felt pressure, strange tugging sensations, but the local anesthesia kept the pain at bay. "Got it," Armstrong said. Withdrawing tissue samples. Pathology will take 48 to 72 hours. Those 72 hours stretched like taffy. Sarah brought Emma and Lucas to visit, and Maggie taught her granddaughter to make Frank's cornbread, 3 cups of cornmeal, buttermilk, just a touch of sugar, despite what recipes said. Lucas, with that direct honesty of 6-year-olds, asked, "Are you sick, Grandma?" Maggie crouched down to his level, wincing slightly at the movement. "We're finding out, sweetheart. But whatever happens, Grandma loves you very much." Emma, wise beyond her 8 years, took Maggie's hand. "It's okay to be scared." Out of the mouths of babes, Maggie thought, "Thank you, honey. You're right." The call came on March 18th at 10 in the morning. All 3 of them were at Maggie's house, trying to pretend they weren't watching the phone like it might explode. When it rang, Sarah answered on speaker. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Dr. Armstrong. I have your pathology results." Maggie's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "It's not cancer." The relief was so sudden, so complete, that Maggie actually felt dizzy. Sarah started crying. David's eyes went bright with unshed tears. "Thank God," Maggie whispered. "Thank God." "However," Armstrong continued, and that single word pierced their relief like a needle, "it's not a simple cyst either. The pathology shows this is a mature cystic teratoma, also called a dermoid cyst, a teratoma." Maggie's nursing knowledge supplied the definition. Those usually have hair, teeth, bone, sometimes even neural tissue. Yes, this one is particularly complex, and at 18 centimeters, it needs to come out. There's risk of rupture, which can cause peritonitis or ovarian torsion, which is a surgical emergency. But it's benign. 95% of mature teratomas are benign, and yours shows no signs of malignancy. But, Mrs. Wilson, this isn't something we can watch and wait. Given the size and complexity, I'm recommending surgery as soon as possible. They scheduled it for March 22nd, 4 days away. The preoperative testing consumed the next 2 days. EKG, blood work, chest x-ray, anesthesia consultation. Dr. Mark Stevens, the anesthesiologist, was a grandfatherly man with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. Your EKG shows a minor arrhythmia, he explained. Nothing that prevents surgery, but it does elevate your risk slightly. We'll monitor you very carefully. The consent form seemed endless. Risk of bleeding, risk of infection, risk of anesthesia complications, risk of death rare, but possible. Maggie signed each one with a hand that only shook a little. The night before surgery, Sarah insisted on cooking dinner at Maggie's house. David set the table, automatically leaving Frank's spot empty, a habit none of them had broken. Emma and Lucas were there too, clutching handmade cards. Emma's showed a tick figure with a cape labeled Super Grandma. Lucas had drawn what might have been Maggie or might have been a potato with arms, accompanied by the words, "You're brave," in wobbly letters. Maggie taped both cards to the refrigerator and tried not to cry. Sarah made pot roast, Frank's favorite, green beans with bacon, the cornbread they'd made together. They talked about everything except tomorrow childhood vacations. Frank's terrible dad jokes, the time David drove the lawnmower into the goldfish pond at age 12. After Sarah took the kids home, just the adults remained. The laughter faded into heavy silence. At 10 o'clock, Maggie asked David to come into her bedroom alone. Sarah gave them privacy, though Maggie could feel her daughter's curiosity. "There's something I need to tell you," Maggie began, her throat tight. "In case anything happens tomorrow." "Don't talk like that. David, please." She took his hands. "You were adopted. You came to us when you were 6 months old. Your father and I couldn't have more children after Sarah. But we loved you exactly the same. Exactly. I need you to know that." The silence stretched so long that Maggie thought she might shatter. Then David said, "Mom, I know." "What?" "I found out when I was 18. I needed my birth certificate for a passport. I saw the adoption papers in the county records." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want to hurt you. You are my mother. The woman who gave birth to me is a name on paper. You're the one who sat up with me when I had nightmares, who taught me to ride a bike, who—" His voice broke. "Biology doesn't make you my mom. Everything else does." They held each other, crying, years of unnecessary pain dissolving in shared tears. "I thought you'd feel like you weren't really ours," Maggie sobbed. "I thought you'd think I didn't appreciate being chosen." In the living room, Sarah had made a discovery of her own, trying to organize papers as a distraction from anxiety. She'd found a locked metal box in Maggie's closet. A small key on her mother's keychain fit the lock. Inside a letter, in Frank's handwriting, the envelope read, "Maggie to be opened after I'm gone." Sarah stared at it for a long moment. Then she carried it to the bedroom. "Mom, I think you need to read this." Maggie took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed slightly, dated as 2 weeks before Frank's stroke 5 years ago. "He wanted me to read it aloud," Maggie said. "Seeing Frank's note at the top, he knew I'd need you both with me." She began to read, her voice breaking over her husband's words from beyond the grave. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope I had time to say goodbye. But knowing how strokes work, I probably didn't. I need to tell you something I didn't have the courage to say while I was alive. 6 months before I noticed the swelling in your abdomen. I asked you to see a doctor. You said it was just bloating, just aged, just nothing. I believed you because I wanted to, but I knew. Maggie, somewhere in my heart, I knew something was wrong. I should have pushed harder, should have driven you to the doctor myself, should have made you promise. I didn't, and that's my greatest regret. So I'm asking now, from wherever I am, please get it checked. Don't let fear steal the time you have left with our kids and grandkids. Sarah needs you. David needs you. Those babies need their grandmother. You're stronger than you know. You've survived so much already. You can survive this too. And Maggie, you're never alone. I'll be watching from heaven, or the stars, or wherever husbands go to keep loving their wives. Be brave. My love, trust the doctors. Let the kids help you live for me, for them, for yourself, your Frank. P.S. That blue shirt you keep wearing, I meant for you to have it. You always looked beautiful in my clothes. By the time Maggie finished, all three of them were crying. David's arm was around his mother's shoulders. Sarah knelt beside the bed, holding Maggie's hand. He knew. Maggie whispered, "For 5 years, he's been gone, and he's still trying to take care of me." "And he's right," Sarah said fiercely. "You're going to get through this. We're all going to get through this." At midnight, unable to sleep, Maggie wandered through her house. She touched Frank's reading chair, the photo albums, her grandmother's mirror, passed down through 3 generations. She packed a hospital bag, comfortable clothes, her phone charger, toiletries, and Frank's blue work shirt. Just holding it made her feel braver. At 3 in the morning, the music box started playing again. "You Are My Sunshine." The melody drifted through the dark house like a promise. Maggie picked it up, wound it even though it shouldn't need winding, and packed it too. Signs everywhere. Frank telling her she'd be okay, or God, or just the universe's strange synchronicity. At 5, she showered with the hospital's special soap. At 6, Sarah and David arrived. They drove to the hospital in silence, the radio filling the void. Sam Cooke's "You Send Me" came on the song from Maggie and Frank's wedding dance. All 3 of them cried without speaking. Pre-op check-in at 6:45, gown on, IV started, vitals taken, blood pressure high from anxiety, heart rate 95. Dr. Armstrong came by to review the procedure one final time. "I'll remove the tumor and try to save the ovary. If it's too damaged, the ovary comes out 3 to 4 hours, depending on adhesions." At 7:30, they came to transport Maggie to the operating room. Final hugs, final I love yous. "Tell Emma and Lucas that Grandma loves them." Maggie said to David, to Sarah. You saved my life by not giving up on me. And then she was rolling down the hallway toward whatever came next. The operating room was bright and cold. The temperature kept at 65 degrees to prevent bacterial growth. Maggie felt herself lifted from the gurney onto the narrow surgical table, her arms positioned on boards extending from either side like a crucifixion. You're doing great, Mrs. Wilson, said Dr. Stevens, the anesthesiologist, his voice gentle above her. I'm going to give you something to help you relax. Then you'll go to sleep. Count backward from 100 for me. The medication hit her bloodstream like warm honey. 100, 99, 98, 97, 96, 94. Darkness. Dr. Rachel Armstrong stood at the surgical field. Her team assembled around her, a surgical resident, 2 scrub nurses, a surgical tech, and Dr. Stevens monitoring anesthesia. At 8:15, she made the first incision, a low transverse cut along the bikini line. The abdominal cavity opened to reveal the mass, and even Armstrong, who'd seen hundreds of ovarian tumors, paused. The tumor was massive, crowding against Maggie's other organs, the surface a strange mottled texture, unlike the smooth capsule of typical dermoid cysts. Let's get some exposure, she said, placing retractors. By 9:30, she'd carefully separated the mass from surrounding adhesions. The right ovary was compressed but potentially salvageable. She worked methodically, her movements precise, cutting the final attachments. Almost there, she murmured. Then she saw it, a small tear in the mass's capsule, probably from manipulation, and through that tear, something that made her hand still hair, long blonde strands, clearly visible. She looked at the scrub nurse over her mask. Have you ever seen this much hair in a dermoid? The nurse shook her head, eyes wide. Armstrong made the decision to open the mass in the operating room rather than waiting for pathology. She needed to see what they were dealing with. The specimen pan held the tumor 4.2 pounds of dense tissue. Her scalpel cut through the thick capsule. What spilled out belonged in a medical textbook, not a routine surgery. Hair filled the cavity, not a few strands, but masses of it, blonde, 8 to 10 inches long, as though someone had stuffed a wig inside. Sebaceous material, typical of dermoids, but then teeth, not 1 or 2, but 12 fully formed teeth, gleaming white with visible roots, bone fragments, pieces that looked disturbingly like skull and vertebrae, and tissue that, even to her experienced eye, resembled primitive neural structures. Document everything, she said quietly. Photos of all structures. The surgical resident leaned in. Dr. Armstrong, neither have I. Not like this. Armstrong was closing the abdominal incision when Dr. Stevens' voice cut through the routine. Armstrong, we have a problem. She glanced at the monitors. Maggie's heart rate was dropping. 85, 70, 55, 40. What happened? Armstrong's hands continued their work, but her focus split. Possible reaction to antibiotic or vagal response. Stevens' voice was tight. Heart rate 25, 15. Then the monitor's steady beep became a single, continuous tone. Flatline. Systole, Stevens called out. Starting CP. The surgical tech immediately positioned herself over Maggie's chest, hands locked, arms straight. She began compressions with the mechanical rhythm of someone who'd done this dozens of times. The body jolted with each thrust. Armstrong had to make a split-second decision, abort closing to help with resuscitation, or finish securing the abdomen. A patient couldn't survive with an open belly, but couldn't survive without a heartbeat either. "I'm closing," she said, her hands moving faster. "You handle the code." 1 milligram epi, Stevens ordered. The medication went in through the IV. The compressions continued. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Charging defib. Everyone clear. Armstrong lifted her hands from the surgical field. The shock delivered with a thump that made Maggie's whole body jerk. The monitor showed a brief flutter, then flat again. Resume compressions. Another epi. Armstrong finished the fascial layer, started on the subcutaneous tissue. Her hands worked with practice speed, but inside her chest, her own heart was hammering. Patients weren't supposed to die from dermoid cyst removal. This was supposed to be routine. 5 minutes, 6, 7. "Should we call it?" someone asked quietly. "No," Stevens said. "She's 63 and relatively healthy. Keep going." 8 minutes. Armstrong tied off the skin layer and stepped up to join compressions, spelling the exhausted tech. The chest was firm beneath her hands, ribs compressing with each thrust. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 30 compressions, 2 breaths from the ambu bag. 10 minutes. Another shock. Another epi. 11 minutes. 12 minutes. "I've got a rhythm," Stevens said suddenly. "Sinus. 40. 50. 60. The monitor showed the familiar sawtooth pattern of heartbeats. Regular, steady, blood pressure rising, oxygen saturation climbing. She was back. In the surgical waiting room, Sarah had been pacing for 3 hours. The volunteer had brought them an update at 9. Surgery started, going well. Another at 10:30. Still going well, right on schedule. But at 11 o'clock, no update came. 11:15, 11:30. "Something's wrong," Sarah said. Her nurse's instinct was screaming. They said 3 to 4 hours. David reminded her, "It hasn't been 4 hours yet." "I can feel it." "David, something happened." At 11:45, a volunteer approached, not the cheerful one from before, but an older woman with a somber expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Wilson, Armstrong would like to speak with you. There's a private consultation room this way." Sarah's legs buckled. David caught her arm, held her upright. They followed the volunteer down a corridor that seemed to stretch for miles, into a small windowless room with a table and 4 chairs. The room where they'd tell you someone died, Sarah thought. 5 minutes later, Armstrong entered, still in her scrub cap, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "Is she?" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "She's alive." The relief nearly knocked Sarah down again. David's hand gripped hers so hard it hurt. "But we had a complication during surgery." Armstrong sat down, gestured for them to do the same. "Your mother experienced cardiac arrest on the operating table. We performed CPR for 12 minutes before we got her heart started again." 12 minutes. David's voice was hoarse. Isn't brain damage?" "We won't know the full extent of any complications until she wakes up. Right now, she's in the ICU, still intubated. The breathing tube is still in place. Her heart function is stable, and her vital signs are improving, but she's critical. Can we see her? Sarah asked. In about an hour. She needs to stabilize first. I'll have a nurse come to get you. After Armstrong left, Sarah and David sat in that terrible little room, holding each other, crying. The ICU was a landscape of beeping machines and hushed voices. Maggie lay in bed, tubes snaking from her mouth, her arms, her chest. Monitors displayed incomprehensible numbers that Sarah understood all too well. Oxygen saturation, blood pressure, heart rate, each beep a tiny reassurance that her mother was still alive. They could only stay 15 minutes. Sarah held Maggie's hand warm, thank God, still warm, and whispered, "We're here, Mom. We're right here." At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Armstrong returned with a young doctor in a white coat, Dr. Lisa Monroe. According to her badge, pathology. "We need to discuss the tumor," Armstrong began. They were in the same horrible consultation room. First, the good news: it was completely benign. A mature cystic teratoma, as we suspected, no signs of malignancy. Thank God, Sarah breathed. However, there were some unusual characteristics. The size, obviously, the complexity of the tissues, and she paused. We ran DNA analysis on the specimen. It's standard protocol for teratomas this complex. Something in her tone made Sarah's stomach tighten. The DNA in the tumor doesn't match your mother's DNA. Hey, but David frowned. That's impossible. It's not, because while it doesn't match, it is related to her. Specifically, it shows a sibling-level genetic relationship. The room seemed to tilt. Monroe spoke up, her voice gentle but clinical. Your mother's tumor is the result of something called vanishing twin syndrome. At some point very early in her mother's pregnancy, probably before anyone knew there were twins, your mother absorbed her twin sibling into her own body. That absorbed twin cells remained dormant for 63 years. Recently, likely triggered by postmenopausal hormonal changes, those cells began to develop. You're saying, Sarah said slowly, that Mom had a twin sister inside her for 63 years. Yes, the genetic analysis confirms it. Female sibling, different blood type. The tissue was type O. Your mother is type A. The hair we found was blonde. Your mother's is brown. Different genetic expression. David's voice was barely a whisper. She was never alone. This is exceptionally rare. Monroe continued. Most vanishing twin absorptions are complete, leaving no trace. Very rarely, absorbed tissue remains and develops later in life as a teratoma, but one this large. With this level of differentiation, we're talking about a case study here. Sarah suddenly remembered the magazine article, the pictures of teratomas filled with hair and teeth. She'd dismissed it as too rare. She'd been wrong. Should we tell her? David asked. When she wakes up? Absolutely. Armstrong said. She deserves to know, but perhaps wait until she's stronger. This information can be psychologically overwhelming. Sarah thought about her mother cooking 2 portions, talking to herself, the childhood imaginary friend their grandmother mentioned, the feeling of incompleteness Maggie had described after Frank died. She always knew, Sarah said softly. Somehow, she always knew. Night fell over Cincinnati, But in the ice, time had no meaning. Sarah refused to leave. David brought coffee. Neither of them drank. Sandwiches neither could eat. They sat on either side of Maggie's bed, watching the monitors, counting each breath the ventilator pushed into her lungs. Maggie didn't wake. At 3 in the morning, an alarm pierced the quiet. Sarah's head jerked up from where she'd been dozing. A nurse rushed in, followed by a respiratory therapist with a portable machine. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," the nurse said. "Adjusting settings, possible pulmonary edema. Fluid in the lungs, a common complication after cardiac arrest," Sarah knew. The heart stops pumping efficiently. Fluid backs up into the lungs. Breathing becomes difficult. Even with the ventilator doing the work, Maggie's body was struggling. They were asked to leave during the intervention. Sarah and David stood in the hallway while medical staff moved around their mother's bed with practiced urgency. Through the glass, Sarah watched them administer diuretics, adjust the ventilator settings, draw blood gases. "I can't lose her," Sarah whispered. "David, I can't." "She's strong," David said, but his voice carried doubt. "She survived this long." Unspoken between them, she'd survived because her twin sister had been with her, and now that presence was gone. Dr. Armstrong came by at 7 that morning, exhausted from a night of emergency surgeries. She reviewed Maggie's chart, her expression grave. The cardiac arrest put stress on all her organ systems, lungs, kidneys, potentially the brain. "We're managing the pulmonary edema, but it may take several days for her to stabilize enough to wake up. And when she does—" She paused. "There's a possibility of deficits, cognitive impairment, memory loss. We won't know until she's conscious." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. "This is my fault. I should have made her see a doctor years ago." "Sarah," David began. "No, it is. I'm a nurse. I should have noticed. I should have pushed harder. If she'd come in when Frank first told her, when the tumor was smaller." "You live across the country." David's voice rose. "I'm the one who should have visited more, who should have noticed." "You're not even—" Sarah stopped herself, but too late. Not even what? David's face went white. Not even her real son. "Is that what you were going to say?" "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it was." Years of unspoken hurt poured into those 3 words. "I'm adopted, so I don't count as much. I don't have the right to feel guilty because I'm not really her child." "David, I didn't mean—" "You were always Dad's favorite," David said, his voice breaking. "Did you know that? Always? And I tried so hard to earn my place, to prove I belonged, but I was never quite enough." "That's not true. You were his son. I was the son he chose." "There's a difference, Sarah. There's always been a difference." A passing nurse glanced their way. Sarah realized they were nearly shouting in an ICU hallway. She grabbed David's arm and pulled him into an empty family room. "You think you were Dad's favorite?" Sarah's own voice shook. "You were the one he took fishing, who he taught to fix cars, who got all the attention. I was just there, just the daughter who was expected to help with dishes and not cause trouble." "That's not how I remember it." "Maybe that's because you were so busy feeling like an outsider that you didn't notice I felt invisible." They stared at each other, years of sibling rivalry and misunderstanding hanging between them like fog. Then Sarah started crying. "I'm sorry. God, David, I'm sorry. I didn't mean none of this matters. Mom is what matters." David pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry, too. I'm so tired and scared, and me, too." They held each other, both crying. Finally, honest, after 35 years of dancing around unspoken hurts. On March 24th, Sarah made the difficult decision to bring Emma and Lucas to the hospital. They needed to see their grandmother, even like this, maybe especially like this. The children stood beside Maggie's bed, small and frightened among the machines. Emma held her grandmother's hand carefully, as though it might break. "She looks like Sleeping Beauty," Emma whispered. "Will she wake up?" Lucas asked, his voice tiny. Sarah knelt beside her son. "We hope so, sweetheart. We're praying she will." Emma leaned close to Maggie's ear. "Grandma, we need you. Please, wake up." Lucas placed his "You're Brave" card on the bedside table, his fingers lingering on the paper as though it were a talisman. They left after 15 minutes. The ICU's rules strict, but 30 minutes later, a nurse came running to the waiting room. Her fingers moved. She squeezed my hand when I asked her to. Sarah and David rushed back. Dot Stevens was already there, checking responses. "Mrs. Wilson, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand, Beer. Good. Now wiggle your toes." Another pause. "Excellent!" He turned to them. "She's starting to wake up. Let's try reducing the sedation. See if she'll breathe on her own." Over the next 4 hours, they slowly decreased the medications, keeping Maggie unconscious. At 8 o'clock, her eyes fluttered. At 9, she took her first spontaneous breath. At 10, they removed the breathing tube. Maggie's eyes opened, confused and frightened. Her throat was raw from the tube, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah!" Sarah burst into tears. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." Maggie's gaze found David, "Both my babies." Then, inexplicably, "Frank, Sarah exchanged a worried glance with David. Confusion, brain damage. But Maggie's eyes were clear. "I saw him. During. Whatever happened, he was there. He said it wasn't time yet. Near-death experience," Sarah thought. Or dreams. Or the brain's way of processing trauma. It didn't matter. Her mother was awake. Her mother was alive. By March 25th, Maggie had been moved from I to a regular hospital room. She was weak, her abdomen tender, but alive and alert. Dr. Armstrong came by during morning rounds, her presence both reassuring and concerning. "How are you feeling?" Like I was hit by a truck that backed up and hit me again. Maggie's voice was still hoarse, but her eyes were clear. Armstrong smiled. "That's fairly accurate. You gave us quite a scare." She pulled up a chair. "I need to discuss the surgery results and the pathology findings. Would you like your children here?" Something in her tone made Maggie's stomach clench. "Yes." Sarah and David were summoned from the cafeteria, where they'd been forcing down breakfast. When they arrived, Dr. Armstrong had been joined by a younger woman in a white coat. "This is Dr. Lisa Monroe, our genetic counselor. What we need to discuss involves some complex genetics." Maggie straightened in bed, wincing at the pull of stitches. "Just tell me straight. I'm a nurse. I can handle medical terminology." The surgery was successful. The tumor is completely removed. Your right ovary is intact and functional. The cardiac arrest resolved with no apparent lasting damage. Your cognitive function appears normal. Your EKG looks good, but The tumor was a mature cystic teratoma, as we suspected, completely benign. However, given its size and complexity, we ran DNA analysis as part of our standard protocol. Armstrong paused, choosing her words carefully. The DNA in the tumor doesn't match your DNA, Mrs. Wilson. Maggie frowned. That's impossible. It came from my body. It came from your body, but it wasn't your tissue, not genetically. Monroe leaned forward. Have you heard of vanishing twin syndrome? Vaguely. When one twin absorbs the other in utero? Exactly. Based on the genetic analysis, you were originally a twin pregnancy. Your twin sister was absorbed into your body very early in gestation, probably before your mother even knew she was carrying twins. Most of the time, the absorbed twin cells are completely broken down and leave no trace. But in rare cases, some cells remain dormant. The room seemed to tilt. You're saying I had a twin? Yes. And those dormant cells, your sister's cells, remained in your body for 63 years. Recently, likely triggered by hormonal changes after menopause, they began to develop. That's what the teratoma was. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Mom carried her twin sister inside her for her entire life. The genetic evidence is conclusive. Just Monroe said. The tissue had different DNA sibling level matched to your mother, different blood type. The hair we recovered was blonde, while Mrs. Wilson's natural color is brown, different genetic expression entirely. Maggie's first response was anger, hot and irrational. This is insane. How could I not know? There was no way for you to know. Doctor, Monroe said gently, this is exceptionally rare. I'm a nurse. I should have felt something, should have known something was wrong with my body. Sarah reached for her mother's hand. Mom, do you remember what Grandma used to say about you as a child? Maggie stopped, confusion replacing anger. What? She said you had an imaginary friend, that you talked to someone no one else could see. You called her, Sarah's voice caught, you called her Lily. The name hit Maggie like a physical blow. Lily. She hadn't thought about that in 50 years. But suddenly the memories flooded back with crystal clarity. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, talking to the girl only she could see, blonde hair, blue eyes, everything Maggie wasn't, her mother dismissing it. All children have imaginary friends. Her father, more concerned, she's 7 years old. This should have stopped by now. But Lily had felt real, more real than imaginary. And when Maggie finally stopped mentioning her, not because she'd gone away, but because adults didn't believe the loneliness had been crushing. Oh my God, Maggie whispered. Other memories surfaced, pieces of a puzzle she'd never known she was solving, always cooking 2 portions, even after Frank died. Talking to herself, except it never felt like talking to herself, more like having a conversation with someone who wasn't quite there, looking in her grandmother's mirror and sometimes feeling like someone else was looking back. The feeling that had haunted her entire life that something was missing, that she was incomplete. After Frank died, she'd attributed it to grief, but it had been there before Frank, before her children, before everything, because she had been incomplete. Literally. I had a sister, she said, tears streaming down her face. All along, I had a sister, and I never knew. Monroe's voice was kind. Some women with absorbed twins report these exact feelings, a sense of presence, of incompleteness. There's some research suggesting cellular memory, that on some unconscious level you were aware of her. Sarah suddenly gripped Maggie's hand harder. Mom, do you remember when I was in the surgical waiting room before your biopsy? What? I found a medical journal from 2000. There was an article about teratomas and vanishing twin syndrome. I read the whole thing, then put it down because I thought it was too rare to be relevant. Sarah's voice shook. But something made me read it, like I was being prepared. She was trying to tell us, Maggie whispered. Lily, she wanted to be found. David, ever practical, asked the question that anchored them. Does this change anything medically? Is there risk of it happening again? No, Armstrong said firmly. The tissue is completely removed. There's no possibility of regrowth. Medically, this changes nothing. Then does it matter? David asked. Maggie turned to her son. Yes, it matters. Her voice was fierce, despite her weakness. I spent my whole life feeling like part of me was missing. After your father died, I thought losing him was losing my other half. But maybe... Well, she stopped, the realization too large to contain. Maybe I'd already lost my other half before I was born. Maybe that's why losing Frank hurt so much, because it was the second time I'd lost someone who completed me. She looked at Sarah. Go home, to my house. In the closet, there's a metal box. Frank's letters. Bring it. Mom, you need to rest. Sarah, please. An hour later, Sarah returned with the box. There's another envelope. I didn't see it before. She held it up, her hand shaking. It says, to be opened when you learn the truth. Maggie stared at the envelope, Frank's handwriting as familiar as her own heartbeat. How did he know? She opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 1 week before his stroke, 1 week before he left her forever. Read it aloud, Maggie said. He would want that. Sarah began, her voice breaking over her father's words. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, you know about your sister. I should have told you when I was alive. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward. Last year, I was researching your family history for that genealogy project. Remember, I found your mother's old medical records. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I was curious. There were notes from her pregnancy with you. Early ultrasound in 1961, rare back then. The doctor noted 2 gestational sacs. Follow-up scan 6 weeks later, only 1 fetus. Notes said, possible vanishing twin syndrome. Your mother never told anyone. Different era. Maggie. Miscarriage was shameful. Losing a twin before it was born. She probably thought it didn't matter, but I knew it mattered to you. I knew because of how you always felt incomplete, how you cooked extra food, how you talked to yourself, except it never seemed like yourself you were talking to. When I noticed your abdomen swelling 6 months before I died, I suspected it might be related. I read about absorbed twins sometimes developing teratomas. I tried to get you to see a doctor. You refused. I should have been more forceful, should have told you everything, but I was scared of upsetting you, scared of being wrong, scared of so many things. Now I'm gone, and I'm still scared you won't get the help you need. So I'm asking from beyond the grave, trust the doctors. Let them help you. Your sister has been with you for 63 years. She was never a burden. She was a gift, companionship you didn't even know you had. Now it's time to let her rest. You gave her a lifetime, Maggie. That's more than most twins get. You were the best sister she could have asked for. Even though neither of you knew the other existed, take care of yourself now. For Sarah, for David, for Emma and Lucas, for me and for Lily. Yes, I know that's what you called her. You talked about her in your sleep sometimes. Be brave, my love. You're not alone. You've never been alone. You're Frank. The room was silent, except for the sound of crying. Maggie sobbed, her body shaking with grief and understanding and relief, all tangled together. Sarah held her mother while David gripped both their hands, his own tears falling freely. He knew, Maggie gasped between sobs. For 5 years he's been gone, and he knew all along. He knew about Lily. He knew I wasn't crazy. You were never crazy, Sarah said fiercely. You were carrying your sister, taking care of her, even without knowing. Maggie looked at her daughter, then her son. I wasn't alone all these years, even after Frank died. Even when I felt so isolated, I wasn't alone. She was there. And somehow, understanding that truth hurt less than she'd expected. Because Frank had known. He'd tried to help her even after death. And Lily, her sister, her twin, her lifelong companion had been real. All of it had been real. 6 days after the surgery that nearly killed her, Maggie was cleared to go home. The discharge papers were thick with instructions: no lifting, no driving, pain medications, antibiotics, follow up in 1 week. Sarah packed her mother's belongings, the clothes she'd arrived in, Frank's blue shirt, the music box that still played on its own. I'm staying with you for at least a week, Sarah announced, brooking no argument. David had extended his trip through the weekend. Emma and Lucas had made a Welcome Home Grandma banner that stretched across Maggie's living room when they arrived. The first days were an adjustment. Physical healing was straightforward incision sites, tender but mending. Pain manageable with medication. Emotional healing proved harder. Maggie kept touching her abdomen, feeling the absence of the mass that had been there so long she'd stopped noticing its weight. It's strange, she told Sarah on the 3rd day home. I feel lighter, but also empty. You're grieving, Sarah said gently, for something you didn't know you had. On March 30th, Maggie asked for the pathology report. Armstrong had anticipated this request and provided detailed documentation, including photographs Maggie had specifically requested to see. The images were clinical but striking. Hair, so much blonde hair. The teeth, small and perfect. Bone fragments that looked heartbreakingly human because they were human, just not hers. Can I have a strand of the hair? Maggie asked during her follow-up appointment. Armstrong didn't seem surprised. I saved a sample for you. I thought you might ask. The small medical vial contained a single bliss strand, preserved and sealed. Maggie held it like the precious thing it was. At home, she opened her grandmother's locket, the one that had held Frank's picture since his death. Now, it held both Frank's photo on one side, Lily's hair on the other. Her two halves, the husband who'd loved her for 46 years, and the sister who'd been with her for 63. That evening, Sarah asked quietly, did you want to name her officially? I mean, she had a name, Lily. Maggie's voice was certain. She always had a name. I just forgot for a while. The pieces fell together like a puzzle solving itself. The imaginary friend from childhood. The feeling of talking to someone who wasn't there. The inexplicable comfort of Frank's old shirts because they'd held him, and somehow, through cellular memory or quantum connection or simple human need, they'd held the echo of the sister she'd never known she was missing. April 1st, David returned to Seattle, but something had shifted. The stiffness between mother and son had dissolved in the crucible of near death and revelation. "I love you, Mom," he said at the airport, not because of biology, not despite adoption, just because you're my mother and you raised me, and that's what matters. I love you too, son, mine, in every way that counts. They'd spoken more honestly in 1 week than in 32 years. Sarah stayed through the first full week of recovery, and in those quiet evenings cooking dinner together, washing dishes side by side, watching old movies, they rebuilt something that had cracked 5 years ago. "I'm sorry I judged your divorce," Maggie said on Sarah's last night. "I was trying to protect you, but I was really just scared of losing you." "I'm sorry I pulled away for so long. I was angry, but I was also scared you'd never accept my choices." "I understand now. You were scared of losing me like you lost Lily." Sarah's insight was both painful and healing. "I didn't even know about Lily. But yes, somewhere. I knew." Maggie squeezed her daughter's hand. "We're not wasting any more time being distant." Early April, Emma and Lucas visited for what Maggie decided would be story time. She'd wrestled with how much to tell them they were young, and the truth was strange, but children understood magic better than adults. "Grandma had a sister who was very special," she began. Both kids curled beside her on the couch. She lived inside Grandma's body and kept her company for Grandma's whole life. "Like a guardian angel?" Emma asked. "Something like that. And now she's in heaven with Grandpa Frank." Had Lucas's 6-year-old logic cut through? "So, you were never alone?" Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. "No, sweetheart, I never was." The children accepted this with the ease of youth, already moving on to questions about whether Aunt Lily liked chocolate and if she could see them from heaven. The follow-up appointment on April 12th brought the final medical reassurance. Dr. Armstrong reviewed scans and pathology with obvious satisfaction. Incision healed beautifully, all margins clear, no residual tissue. The ovary is functioning normally. There's no risk of recurrence because this was a unique circumstance, not a genetic predisposition to tumors. "She's really gone," Maggie said softly. "Yes, completely." Bittersweet didn't begin to cover it. Relief that the medical crisis was over. Grief that Lily, finally named, finally acknowledged, was truly gone now. "Thank you," Maggie told Armstrong, "for saving my life and for bringing her back to me before letting her go." In May, Maggie joined an online support group for teratoma survivors. Most had smaller tumors, simpler stories. When she shared hers, the vanishing twin, the cardiac arrest, Frank's letters, the childhood imaginary friend made real, the response was overwhelming. One woman, 40 and recently post-surgery, wrote, "I always felt like I was two people. Now I understand why." Another, My daughter talks to someone we can't see. She calls her Rosie. After reading your story, I'm having her tested. Community and rare experience, understanding and shared strangeness. On May 15th, with Pastor Matthew's blessing. Maggie held a small memorial service at her church. Just Sarah, David, Emma, Lucas, and a handful of close friends. Simple and brief. We're here to remember Lily Wilson, Maggie said, her voice steady. Never born, but always present. She was with me for 63 years, and I'm grateful for every moment, even the ones I didn't know to treasure. They released a white balloon with gold ribbon. Emma and Lucas helping her let go. Watching it rise into the May sky, Maggie felt something lift from her chest. Not sadness, not quite worse, just peace. New patterns emerged as spring turned to summer. Maggie consciously cooked single portions now, a deliberate choice rather than unconscious habit. But she still set two places at the table, hers and Frank's, because some rituals were too precious to abandon. She wore Lily's locket daily, kept the music box on her bedside table. When she looked in her grandmother's mirror now, she saw herself clearly. No more shadows, no more feeling of missing pieces. The missing piece hadn't been Lily after all. It had been knowing about Lily. The truth was what she'd needed, not the twin herself. By October, 6 months post-surgery, Maggie's 64th birthday arrived with family gathered at her house. Sarah and the kids. David flew in with his new girlfriend, Michelle. They cooked together Frank's cornbread recipe, pot roast, green beans. Grandma, you seem different, Emma observed with that child's clarity. How so? Sweetheart, happier, like you're all here now? Maggie's throat tightened. I'm all here, Emma, finally. In late October, a local women's health organization asked Maggie to speak at their monthly meeting. She titled her presentation, Listen to Your Body and the People Who Love You. Standing before 50 women, she told her story. The 6 years of denial, Frank's warnings she'd ignored, Sarah's persistence that saved her life, the surgery, the cardiac arrest, the discovery of Lily, the letters from beyond the grave. I'm here to tell you 3 things, she said. First, don't self-diagnose on Google. Second, when people who love you say something's wrong, believe them. And third, her voice caught. The truth, even when it's strange and scary and impossible, is always better than living in denial. The standing ovation surprised her. Afterward, women lined up to share their stories. One made an appointment with her doctor on the spot, admitting she'd been ignoring symptoms for months. Another confessed her mother had always claimed to feel like a twin. And now she wondered, You're saving lives, Sarah told her mother that night. Lily's legacy isn't tragedy, it's awareness. On Halloween, Emma and Lucas visited in costume, Emma as a doctor, Lucas as an astronaut. They made sugar cookies shaped like pumpkins. The kitchen filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon. The radio played You Are My Sunshine, and Maggie pinged along, her voice stronger than it had been in years. She looked around her kitchen at the people she loved, Frank's photo on the mantel, Lily's locket warm against her chest, her children, both of them. Biology be damned. Her grandchildren covered in flower and joy. She touched her abdomen, feeling the scar where 18 centimeters of her sister had lived, not empty anymore, fuller than ever. Because she understood now family isn't what you're born with. It's what you build, what you choose, what you discover, and sometimes it's what was there all along, waiting to be found. The autumn leaves fell outside her window, gold and red and perfect. Maggie Wilson, 64 years old, alive and whole, and finally, understanding what that meant. The cyst that was just a cyst had turned out to be the key to understanding herself. Sometimes the most frightening truths lead to the most beautiful revelations. And sometimes saying goodbye to what you didn't know you had is exactly how you find what you've been missing all along. She was ready now for whatever came next, for life, for love, for truth. She was finally, completely, wholly ready. Maggie's story reminds us that we're never truly alone, even when loss and loneliness make us feel invisible. How many of us have ignored that persistent voice, whether from our bodies or from people who love us, telling us something needs attention? We cook extra portions out of habit, talk to photos of those we've lost, wear their old clothes, seeking comfort. These aren't signs of weakness. They're evidence of love that transcends time and space. Frank couldn't save Maggie from beyond the grave, but his words could. Sarah couldn't force her mother to face the truth, but her persistence gave Maggie years she might not have had. And Lily. She was there all along, a silent companion Maggie sensed but couldn't name. The truth set Maggie free not from Lily, but from the fear of being incomplete. What voices have you been ignoring? What truth are you avoiding because it feels safer to pretend everything's fine? Sometimes the scariest moment is admitting we need help. But on the other side of that fear is understanding, healing, and the profound relief of finally being seen by others and by ourselves. Share your story below. Have you ever ignored health symptoms because you were scared? What made you finally seek help? Your truth might save someone's life.